I have the pleasure today of introducing Dr. Almeida as one of our guest speakers. Dr. Almeida is the Director of Sun Life Financial Movement Disorder and Research Rehab Center at Wilfrid Laurier University, one of the leading authority movement science and rehab in Parkinson's disease. His research has been featured in Toronto Star, Globe and Mail, CBC, and CTV National News, as well as features in Maclean's and other local Grand magazines. He has been funded by CIHR, NSERC, and a multi-million-dollar grant from the Canadian Foundation for Innovation, and his innovative research on Parkinson's has won several awards, including the Franklin Henry Young Scientist Award for Motor Control in Canada and Parkinson's Society of Canada Young Investigators Award. More recently, he received the Polanyi Prize for Physiology and Medicine, and next month will be given a keynote when he is honored with the North American Award in Early Career Distinguished Scholar Award from NASPSPA. That organization is in New Orleans. Dr. Almeida has spoken about his novel approach in understanding Parkinson's disease across the world, including France, Italy, Brazil, Ireland, Norway, Australia, and in the Netherlands. Dr. Almeida, please.
Well, I think that introduction actually made me nervous. I didn't know I did all those things. She might have made them up. It is great to see everyone here. Let me start by thanking the Parkinson Society. I'm not sure you realize how much work goes into planning something like this, and there are many busybodies, and you can see Tracy still wandering around, still doing stuff. It is amazing how much work they put into events like this. So if you get a chance today, please take the time to thank them. I know it's their job, but at the same time, it is an incredible amount of work. Sometimes I see Tracy working at 10 o'clock at night or 6 o'clock in the morning just to make sure that everything gets done, and it's really impressive that they take the time to do that. So the title of my talk today is A New View on Parkinson's, How Sensory Systems Help Us Understand and Treat Movement Deficits. You'll notice that the word view is in quotes because I'm going to try and focus on one specific sensory system today, and that's, of course, our eyes. I'll try and explain what I mean by this as we go through some of the slides. For those of you who don't know who we are, I guess perhaps maybe what I could start with is maybe explaining a little bit about what our center actually does. So here you can see, and I'm going to use the cursor if I can see it. This is our center. We're centered in Waterloo, the city of Waterloo. And we try and focus on a number of different things. I know some of you have already been there. And what we did when I arrived in Waterloo was we took over a public school that was shut down. There was no longer a need for the public school in the community. And soon we had some funding from Sun Life and from the Canadian Foundation for Innovation so that we were able to basically gut the building and change some of the rooms into facilities for Parkinson's assessment. So the school gym is now a rehab studio for Parkinson's disease. Some of the classrooms have turned into speech and balance and walking assessment facilities, cognitive assessment facilities. And in the front of the building, we now have a clinical neuroassessment unit where we'll be able to bring in neurologists that are trained in movement disorders to work alongside of our research team. So it's kind of meant to be the one-stop shopping place for Parkinson's. As you can see, we have a number of collaborating organizations. You can see the Parkinson Society is right up there at the top because they support a lot of our research. The YMCA is our local partners because they can deliver a lot of our programs. And then you can see that there's a number of different provincial, national, and international groups involved in our research as well. Okay, so let's get into the subject matter at hand. I hope you brought a pen and paper. We're going to be studying the brain anatomy today. If my slides work, let's see if this works for me. So what I want to explain about this slide, perhaps before it starts, is these little green and yellow and purple squares here. What these are different parts of the brain that are responsible for allowing your body to move. So you can see the hip and trunk is up here. You can see that your arm and hands involves getting some messages sent from the brain from right here to move your mouth and your face and your lips. This part of the brain has to be active. And so imagine these things, if we were going to build a brain, like a bunch of wires, that the message starts at the top, at that outer surface, and then the messages have to shoot through some wires down through our spinal cord to get out to our fingertips, our toes, our trunk, to actually be able to move. So, of course, when we think about Parkinson's, what you're going to see here is the wires going right through the middle of the brain. So you can imagine those wires shooting through the middle, and actually the basal ganglia system is right in the center of the brain. And then it shoots down into the spinal cord, so then it can eventually get out to our hands, feet, and our mouth to be able to move. And really, why I'm showing you this slide is that when we think about Parkinson's disease, there's a central core to the brain that is supposed to receive some of these messages and help the brain produce movement. So one of the questions, I'm going to try and change our way of thinking today. We're asking the question on the top of this slide, is Parkinson's really a motor disorder? In other words, when there's a message sent out from the brain, and of course we can see movement symptoms, as you can see in these two cases right here, you can see things that are certainly movement-oriented. And so it seems like the brain must be outputting the wrong type of signal if somebody's moving very slow, or in the case of the lady on the top here, you can see that she's having some difficulty even making some steps out the door. But at the same time, she's got a lot of overactivity. So if you think about the symptoms of Parkinson's, things like tremor, rigidity, bradykinesia, which is a fancy word for slowness, akinesia, which is a lack of voluntary movement, all of these different symptoms that you're seeing really make it seem like it's very possible and very likely that the brain is not outputting the right message. But what I'd like to challenge you all to think about today is, what if, in some cases, the output of the brain to our hands and to our feet and to our mouth, what if it's impaired because there's something that's causing it to be impaired in the first place? And this is where the sensory systems come in, because the sensory systems of our body have to send feedback up through the spinal cord back into the brain to confirm that you're actually doing the right movement. If you don't get that information, it might be possible that sensory deficits actually cause the movement problems that we see in Parkinson's. So help me play scientist today, and we'll see if we can figure this out. As you can see, just think of that first slide where you saw all the wires that were coming from up here and they were shooting down to the middle of the brain, and this is your spinal cord at the bottom that would shoot right down the bottom of the page. But right in the center here, this central core, is actually part of the basal ganglia. And the basal ganglia, we know, is the part of the brain that degenerates in Parkinson's disease. So you can imagine that if this central part of the brain is required for processing of movement and possibly processing of sensory information, if it starts to deteriorate, it can't really participate in helping movement progress as it normally should. So, yes, of course, we see movement symptoms, motor symptoms, but we could ask ourselves a very simple question to start. Is there any non-motor symptoms to Parkinson's? And of course, the answer is yes. I'm sure some of you have heard already that Brock, a scientist from Germany and actually a neurologist, has demonstrated very clearly now that in many cases of Parkinson's, and depending on the study, it ranges from 40 up to 90% of patients, actually demonstrate a loss of sense of smell as their very, very first symptom. And sometimes that symptom can be there 5 to 10 years before your first sign of tremor, first sign of shuffling of gait. And so right away, there's a hint that there's some sensory issues that could be going on. Others of you who I've spoken to in this room have told me that before the tremor started in your hand, you always had this numbness or tingling in the fingertips, and then one day the tremor finally popped out. So there's this hint that there could be a precursor to tremor that is a sensory signal as well. Others have complained about stiffness and pain and saying that, oh, my shoulder was sore for years, but I figured because I played football in high school, it had to have been because of the football that I was playing that my shoulder was stiff. But in reality, that stiff shoulder syndrome that you thought you had was really the start of Parkinson's disease and the rigidity that comes along with Parkinson's. Some of our research, and some of you will recognize the name Mary Jenkins, has looked at other types of sensory impairments, so things like cutaneous sensitivity, so the ability to recognize things with your fingertips or feel with the bottom of your sole what you're feeling underneath your feet as you walk. There are actually some deficits in Parkinson's as well, and these things are all important to realize because these sensory deficits could perhaps impair our ability to output movement. What we're going to be focusing on today, though, is visual dysfunction. And I know proprioceptive is a little bit of a technical term, but we're going to try and focus on visual dysfunction to try and understand how the eyes might be able to contribute to some of the impairments that we see in Parkinson's. And if I have time, I never have time, but if I do have time, I will try and explain what proprioception is and how it might be related to this visual dysfunction. Okay, so I hope they warned you, but I'm going to start by doing some physical assessments right now. We're going to be playing a little bit of a game. And the game is to try and demonstrate to you how visual processing speed might be important to how you plan movements on a daily basis. So what I need you to do right now is you're going to watch on the screen, and a number of lines is going to show up. So this is a test of how fast your eyes can process the number of lines that you see on the screen. So when you see the lines, all you need to do is look at the lines, count them quickly, and if you know what number it is, how about you hold up the number in your hand, whatever that number is, okay? Yeah, that would be great. If you could dim the lights a little bit, that'd be perfect. Are the switches back there? Okay, test time. Everybody ready? So if you do fail this test, I had the number on the very first slide, and you can make an appointment to see me. Okay, here we go. So pay attention. See if you can count the number of lines. I gave the answer away, didn't I, on the very first one? Okay, very good. So everyone managed to get that. That's a good job. You didn't get it. Uh-oh. Okay, you can be the first appointment. Next one, it's going to come a little bit quicker, obviously. Are you ready? You see it? No, I'm just joking. I actually worried there for myself. Okay, hang on. Ready? Here we go. It was 6. It was 6. Okay. A little faster still. Ready? Woo. Now, believe it or not, there are some younger people in the room that can actually process that information very well. And some of you have it. It is actually 5. Okay? Now, what we are demonstrating there is something that we call inspection time. It's the amount of time that your eyes need to be able to take a signal, send it to your brain, and make sense of that information so that you can make a decision about what you actually saw, like holding up your fingers and saying 7. If you think about it, this is really the same as judging when you see a traffic light on the street and saying, oh, I better hit the brakes now. If you don't judge that information appropriately, you might make an error and go right through the intersection. See my point? Okay, good. So, we did this study a while back. This is in 2004. And very similar idea to what you just did yourselves. We presented people with these lines like this, and we asked them to judge in a figure like this on a computer screen or a figure like this. Just tell us which line was longer, the one on the left or the one on the right. And we would have flashed these images at the speeds that you were seeing yourself just now. What we discovered by doing this is that, in fact, patients with Parkinson's disease require 50 to 60 milliseconds longer to be able to process visual information than everybody else would, even if they're in the same age group. So if we took a bunch of 70-year-olds that are not with Parkinson's, a bunch of Parkinson's patients that are also 70 years old, the Parkinson's patients were the ones that had this extra deficit in amount of time to process information. Important to think about, because as we move around in our environments, we're constantly evaluating when are we going to bump into a door, or the people in front of you, or have to step over an obstacle. So it's always critical to be able to process that information as quickly as possible. So you might ask yourself, when would this become important to know? And I'm going to show you a quick example here from one of our studies. This is one of our former grad students. And in this case, you're going to see an example of somebody suffering from freezing of gait. Some of you may recognize this video. I know some of you have seen this before. So this is at our facility, and you can see this gentleman is just simply walking through a double-wide doorway. And he has no problems doing that. Then we closed one of the two doorways. Same person. You can see his steps are actually getting a little bit shorter as he gets to the doorway for some reason. And actually he gets stuck there at the end of the doorway. And we have to help him to keep going. Then, what you're going to see in this third sample is that we've actually added, let me see if I can pause this. See this piece right here? We've actually added, it's only 6 inches. And it's camouflaged so that people shouldn't really recognize that that 6 inches is there, but it makes the doorway just a little bit more narrow than usual. Watch what happens to this same person. Look where he's stopping. It's way early. What if this is that visual processing saying, hey, wait a second, something's not right here. My brain can't handle telling me to keep going forward because I need time to process that visual information first. In this case, you can see that he has some difficulty even approaching the doorway. We asked him to do this a second time. The second time, if the wall wasn't there, he actually would have fallen right over. And he's still having a lot of difficulty getting through the door. So here's just one example of how visual processing itself and having the right amount of time to be able to plan before you move might be considered important. So we've taken the time now to try and ask some of our participants in our studies, how are you guys feeling vision might be contributing to movement problems? When is the most, what are the scenarios that cause the most difficulty? And people have told us narrow doorways, of course, which is why we did that sort of study. Cluttered spaces is something that we're going to talk about a little bit today. So things like shopping malls, busy streets, crowded and cluttered home environments. And these are things that you could be paying attention to, because if your own home environment is cluttered and crowded and there's things that you need to avoid as you're walking, it could be contributing to some of the problems that you're having as you're walking. And then the third sort of category is when you're not watching carefully while you're moving. So we're going to try and cover some of these in a little bit of detail, and then hopefully have some time to talk about treatments. So one of the reasons that I'm really happy to be here today is that I get a chance to show you some of our very, very most recent research. And in fact, this stuff, you're going to notice the dates on the bottom of the slides. These are things that literally have been published just within the last month. Tracy was nice enough to give me some space on the table back there so that if any of you want the articles, I've brought copies with me today so that you can take them on your way out. I should just make clear here that, you know, there are a lot of very, very active and caring graduate students that do this work at our research center. So really what I'm featuring today is the hard work of some of our graduate students. You're going to see this name, Eggetts Martins, quite a few times, and I'll just also mention that her research is funded by the Parkinson Society, so this is critical to our ability to do some of these experiments. Okay, so rather than talking about moving right off the bat, we started to try and take a step back and ask the question, if visual processing is impaired in Parkinson's and it slows us down, could there be other issues with depth perception, visual perception that might also contribute to movement impairments? So what we have on this graph is really three conditions of asking somebody to judge where a target is in space. So imagine, sorry to pick on you, but let's say the chair over there that the gentleman is sitting on. If I wanted to ask everybody in this room, how far is that chair away from here? I could ask you in a number of different ways. The first way is I could ask you to point with a laser. So that's what this first condition refers to here. I could take a laser pointer and say, yeah, that's where I think the person was sitting if he had already moved from that chair. If you think about that, that estimation doesn't involve your body moving to get to that position where the chair was, right? You're just taking your hand and you're pointing the laser, but you're not physically moving yourself to judge if the distance is correct. The second way we could do it is we could say, have a look at where the gentleman's sitting in the chair, remove him from there, and then I could ask you to walk to where you remembered that person sitting. And in that case, you have your legs to help contribute to your brain's ability to judge if you're walking far enough to get to that location. In the third condition here, we actually take away the legs altogether and we wheel the person in a wheelchair. So across all three of these conditions, what I want you to realize is that in all of them, you always have vision available. What we're manipulating, though, is whether or not in the walking condition you've got your legs or your sensory information from your legs to be able to help you get to that target. Or in this case, really you've got vision plus what we would call your vestibular system. It's a balance system that's within your ears that allows you to sense when you're moving, because there's liquid in your ears that tells you when you're leaning sideways or forwards or backwards, and your brain always gets that information. What's probably most important to notice, and I should just explain my groups here. The black bars that you're seeing here are healthy controls. That's what HC stands for. PD on means Parkinson's patients that were on their meds, and PD off means Parkinson's patients without their meds. And the only really big difference here, like clearly across the three black bars, the healthy people are doing the best in terms of error of judging where they are, where the target was. Always the healthy people are doing best. That's not so surprising, right? What's probably most important to notice about this graph, and this is sort of hinting towards significant results here, is that it's specifically when walking that the Parkinson's patients have the problem. You can see that compared here in the white bar where Parkinson's patients are off their meds, if you compare how much air they have to, I keep losing my cursor, there we go, to the healthy people in that very same condition, look how much more air they have compared to the healthy people. That hints to us that even though vision is there, for some reason, the information from the legs isn't helping the person judge the distance that they're actually supposed to be traveling. And you don't really see that same impairment when you get to this wheelchair condition. This isn't a significant difference between the healthy and the Parkinson's patients off their meds. The only one that really is significant is the Parkinson's off here compared to the healthy in that walking condition. So we published this recently to hint to the idea that maybe sometimes vision might be compensating for the sensory information that's supposed to be coming from our arms and legs. We wanted to take this a step further, and some of you may even recognize these walls if you've been involved in these experiments. It took us a long time to build these things, but what we were trying to do here is evaluate if perception and visual information is so important, could there be any differences in how somebody walks when you have walls like this that are basically narrowing? Think of a train track. When you look down a train track, it looks like the two ends are eventually going to meet together, right? On the other side here, you can see that the walls are perfectly parallel. But it's, of course, a very narrow tunnel. And what we were after here was to try and figure out if anyone would be influenced by the narrowing of the tunnel, which is what we would call this condition, compared to the parallel condition, where both walls are parallel. And really the only thing that stands out in these findings is that Parkinson's patients who freeze, that's what this green represents, they seem to have the most difficulty for some reason in terms of their step length, in terms of their double support. Double support is how much time you take doubling on both of your feet. So kind of standing still and trying to catch your balance and make sense of what's going on. And really, if you look at these 2 points here, you can see that it's this freezer group that's having the most difficulty in the parallel wall condition. So when these walls are really narrow like this, it seems that the Parkinson's patients are having the most trouble. What's interesting, though, is notice that healthy people always walk the fastest. That's not really surprising. Parkinson's patients who don't have freezing of gait, they obviously walk slower. And it's these patients who suffer from freezing that walk really slow. And here it's clear that when they walk through these parallel walls, there's something about vision that's causing them to walk differently. The problem is we can't really define what that is because we don't have the ability to evaluate it very well, or we didn't. However, we figured that there's got to be a better way to be able to figure out what people are actually looking at. So this is new technology for us. We were fortunate enough to acquire some equipment with our Canadian Foundation for Innovation money that tracks what your eyes are actually looking at. So imagine a camera that's videotaping your eyes. So what you're going to see on this screen now, this is the central area that your eye is actually looking at while you're walking forward, going through this narrow passageway. So what you're going to see on the left here is a healthy person. Let's see if I can get this to play. This is what it would look like for a healthy person to walk through this doorway. And you can see, generally people look straight down the middle. They don't have any problem getting through there. And they're right to the end of the path. And notice that it took that person 7.28 seconds just to make it through the path. So fairly simple. Now let's take a look at one of our Parkinson's freezers, and I want you to play scientist with me and tell me if you notice any differences. Notice the jumping back and forth and the stuttering. See how the eyes are shaking? And watch what happens at the end of this pathway. The person actually freezes here. And look what the eyes are doing. And who would have thought that it could be that closely linked, that the eye movements are definitely leading the feet into some of these issues? Again, a very, very clear example of how the eyes and what vision is doing may be misleading the body into some sort of movement impairment. I hope you can see where I'm going with this. Obviously, my conclusion is going to be that if we can solve some of these visual and sensory issues, we might be able to treat Parkinson's better. Okay, so those results were pretty convincing for us. And we decided to go back to our doorway experiments here. So this little schematic here is showing you the single wide doorway where you would walk through a doorway. And here's the one with that extra little camouflaged panel so that you're walking through a slightly more narrow doorway. Okay? And this is a case study. This isn't published yet. What we did is we compared two types of Parkinson's patients. We have a case study of a person who has cognitive disability or cognitive dementia, okay? So CD in these graphs stands for cognitive decline, okay? And on this side, we have the patient that is non-cognitively declined. And I just want to point out that these people are the same age. Their severity in terms of Parkinson's is basically the same. They're both right side affected. The only thing that's different is their cognitive score. If you look at this 95 compared to 75, that hints to you that one of the two individuals has more of a cognitive impairment than the other. And when we look at, using that same type of camera, what the people are looking at, notice that for the non-cognitively impaired person, you're seeing a lot of green. Green stands for looking down the center of the pathway, just like a healthy person would, okay? However, if you look at the cognitively impaired Parkinson's patient, notice that this pie is a lot more divvied up with a bunch of different colors. That should hint to you that, in fact, the eyes are jumping from different things in the environment. They're looking at the top of the door, they're looking at the side of the door. For some reason, they're looking out the hallway. They're looking at chairs that aren't even in the scene. They're selecting the wrong pieces of information to look at to judge how to get through the doorway. And I will be able to show you that here. This is the actual video of the two patients. Whoops, sorry. So this is the non-cognitively impaired. And generally speaking, you can see the person's looking straight down the doorway. Couple of glances to that narrowing trick that we have there, and they make it into the hallway. Now, watch how scattered, some out to the computer, sides of the doors, some, for some reason, up towards the top of the doors, and watch the jumping back and forth, right, left, right, left, right, left, right, left. The eyes, again, are all over the place, hinting again that there could be some other link here as to why people are walking or having balance problems because of what vision causes them to do. Working on the explanations. One of the explanations we did come up with, and this is work again featuring another one of our graduate students, was involving trying to figure out if this is something necessarily to do with narrow spaces, or if it could be to do with the fact that spaces are cluttered. And so what I'm trying to show you here in these two pictures, this space obviously looks a little bit more messy, right? There's more things hanging from the aisles and stuff in the shelves, whereas this hallway looks a lot more organized, a lot neater. But which one do you think you would have more trouble trying to walk through? Any idea? The narrow one or the clutter one? How many hands for clutter? Okay. How many for the narrow? Oh, so there's a few. Well, in this picture, and this is what we tried to simulate in one of our experiments, in reality, this is actually a more narrow hallway than this one is. And in this case, it's more cluttered, but it's not as narrow. So we thought we could contrast these two things to try and figure out what really is causing the people to freeze. Is it the clutter or is it the narrowness? And what we did is we put people in a room where basically the same number of cluttered objects are in the room, but they're out to the sides of the room, so there's lots of space in the middle. And people would have started on this end and they would have walked their way across. And in the direct clutter condition, we actually put the clutter stuff right in their path so that the pathway becomes very narrow. So we haven't changed the number of items per se. The number of items that causes the clutter is exactly the same, but in the direct condition, really you've got the clutter causing the space to become narrow as well. And of course, again, we compare the patients that are suffering from freezing, the non-freezers, and healthy controls. And of course, the obvious question to start with is, does freezing occur? And I should explain to you that in experimental settings, it is extremely difficult to get people to freeze. We've set up all types of different experiments to try and cause somebody to freeze and say, oh, this is what causes the freeze. You can't do it. And then you'll be walking the patient out the door and say, well, thanks for coming in anyways. And as they're walking out the door, they freeze for no apparent reason. So we've been struggling to try and figure this out. And we were really happy to find an experiment where, in fact, 21% of the trials, the patients were freezing very predictably. When they were freezing was, in fact, in that direct clutter condition where the clutter happens to be right in their personal space and they really did not appreciate it being in their personal space. So, and I should point out that most of the freezing did actually occur at the most narrowest point of the path. But to try and take this a step further, I'm going to skip over this slide here. While we realized that, of course, if freezers are going to have more difficulty, and Parkinson's patients in general will have more difficulty, we thought it would be important to try and figure out what the eyes were doing. So just to summarize what findings we did actually find, all groups for sure, even the healthy people, they do walk slower when there's clutter in their way. That's not so surprising. The thing is that it's the Parkinson's patients, and specifically the ones that are experiencing this freezing of gait, that were affected by the direct clutter right in the pathway. Definitely more so than the non-freezing Parkinson's patients and the healthy matched controls. But we wanted to ask the question now, do their gaze patterns, what they look at, does that happen to correlate again with what they're experiencing in that direct clutter versus non-cluttered condition? And here's what we found. So what you're seeing here is in blue, you've got the direct clutter. So this is the clutter right in the pathway. And the indirect is the clutter is scattered around the room. And that's shown in red. And here, you've got the healthy people, and we'll probably start by focusing on them. And then we're going to look at the Parkinson's patients with the freezing of gait so that we've got a good comparison. So what you can see is if we focus on the healthy people, in reality, the healthy people seem to look mainly towards the end goal of the path. They look at the path itself, and in some cases, only when in the direct clutter, they seem to look more at the path, the edges of the path, and the actual clutter itself. So that's a pretty standard pattern of what you would expect for healthy people. However, notice how much this blue bar stands out here for the freezers. The freezers really seem to be suffering when they have that direct clutter in their way. And look how many fixations. This is the number of fixations of your eyes on these targets. It's near double the amount of fixations of any other condition that you can see across both of the groups, hinting to the fact that the Parkinson's patients are really selecting to look a lot more to try and collect visual information to help them get through the walking task. This graph shows it even further. In this case, we were measuring how much time they were spending. Remember I told you initially when we did that test, I said patients with Parkinson's disease need 50 to 60 milliseconds more than you or I would to be able to process visual information. Well, in this graph, what we're really looking at is how much time did they spend in these fixations. So sure, they're doing more, but are they longer? And this is where the results become even more clear, because you can see that the blue bars still represent the direct clutter, and this is our freezing group. Look how high these three blue bars are compared to the healthy people down here. They are spending an enormous amount of time trying to figure out what is this clutter of information in front of them, and they're having difficulty dealing with it. So you see a dramatic increase in fixations on the path and the clutter in that direct condition for the Parkinson's patients. Okay, so let's move on to something else. Trying to take a very different approach. It's clear from what I've shown you so far that when vision is there, it's causing trouble, isn't it? So we went the opposite direction. How about we take it away? How about we put the patients in the dark? And if they don't have vision, does that mean that they should actually be better? What do you think? No? Might be better? Well, and we're not going to focus on all of these conditions. And this article, here again is the name Eggerts Martins. This is one of our PhD students. This article, which I've also left in the back, just came out last week in the journal PLOS 1. And what we did, we're not going to focus on everything, but I've shown you some of these doorway studies where we asked people to walk towards a doorway. Well, what we did is we asked people to walk towards the frame of a doorway, kind of like these openings that you can see at the back of the room right now. We said, take a look at where this door frame is, We're going to shut off all the lights on you, so you know the frame is there, but you can't see it anymore. Walk towards the doorway and make sure that you don't hit into the wall as you go there. Can you believe I got that passed through ethics in the first place? So that's my dark condition. And of course, you can see that there is a severe number of freezes when there's a fear of a potential upcoming wall or doorway that you're going to hit, okay? In contrast to that, so that's why it says dark, because you're remembering that the door frame is approaching, but you're not actually going to be able to see it because literally we've turned off all the lights in the room. In contrast to that, this is being able to see the frame, but nothing else in the room. So imagine shutting off all the lights, but almost like a movie theater, we lined the frame of the door with illuminating lights so that you could see the frame of the door. You would think that if you can see the frame of the door so that you don't hit it, you should have less freezing. Well, you still have more freezing than some of these other conditions. So it is a little bit puzzling that even though you can see the frame that you're supposed to avoid, mind you, you're still in darkness, there is a significant number of freezes, 30 to 40 freezes still happening here, okay? What I'm contrasting this to, if you look down here, this is the lowest amount of freezes, and this was simply asking the people to walk in the opposite direction. So what I did is I took the people to the door frame, and I said, okay, come walk towards me. There's nothing out here. It's an open space, so you don't have to worry about anything. And look how little the number of freezes was. And it's the threat of what your eyes had planned because they knew that there's a door frame coming. So there may be a link to what the eyes are seeing, what it puts into memory, and how that memory plan involves planning how you're going to move to get through that doorway. So we're getting closer in terms of trying to figure out what these things really mean in terms of how we might be able to help people planning home environments and stuff. So, where are we headed from here? If you think about that last experiment that I just told you about, the one obvious thing that stands out is if I'm imagining a door frame that I could potentially hit, and I'm scared that I'm going to hit it, then maybe there's an anxiety factor that we're missing here, and we fail to acknowledge all this time. Maybe when the eyes judge something in the distance, maybe they're judging something that's potentially dangerous, and that's the information that our body's encoding to make sure that we're not going to hit that doorway. And that's why you see more freezing when you walk towards a doorway than walking into open space, even if it's in the dark. So, sooner or later, ethics is going to tell me that I can't do these studies because they're too dangerous, right? We have invested in what we call virtual reality equipment, and this is in fact what the Parkinson Society is funding for us right now. So to minimize the risks that the patients will be put through, imagine this scenario. This is almost like a video game. You put glasses on and you watch, like a movie, your environment passing you by as if you're walking through the environment, okay? As you're walking, imagine you're trying to walk this plank to get to the other side, and way down here is area that you could fall into. You're not really going to fall because you're actually walking on flat ground. But virtual reality can trick you into feeling like you're going to fall. And of course, everybody's safe, and we've got them harnessed and everything else, which is how I got it passed through ethics. But at the same time, what we're going to do now is we've basically bought something like a lie detector test. It's a test that monitors your heart rate, monitors your blood pressure, skin conductance, so that if you get anxious, just like when you're telling a lie, all those tests are going to prove positive and say, oh, wow, look, the anxiety is linked to when the freezing or the balance loss starts to occur. And this is where we're headed right now in our research, and we're very excited about it. This is what we'll be doing this summer. Okay. Very finally, I know there's could be lots of questions, so I'll end with something on a positive note. We're certainly identifying deficits that people hadn't really thought of in the first place. And it's clear that vision must have some sort of role in terms of what movement impairments we see in Parkinson's patients. So, of course, if we start to understand these impairments, really the next step is what are we going to do to treat it? It doesn't help if we just keep identifying more and more problems. We've already got a big enough list of problems. So the trick now is, what can we do to try and enhance what vision gives us so that we can actually better move in our environments? I'll show you a few examples. This is another graduate student, Hasil Bach, who was at our center last year. And some of you may recognize this type of stuff. So it's very well known that visual cues, like lines on a carpet, can actually enhance your ability to walk. The reason for that is that it gives you very specific and cued information, and any one of you could do this in your own homes if you have these sorts of problems. You could put lines of tapes down so that you have specific targets, so that your feet can actually plan where they're going to walk one by one, so that there's no tripping or falling or loss of balance. Especially in tight spaces, this might be a very good idea. Well, one of my students decided that he would compare, can you get that same improvement when you're walking down a hallway, when you've got all these lines of tape there, compared to a treadmill? And I was a little puzzled when he came up with this idea, to be honest. I said, well, why would you bother? There's still lines of tape. They should have the exact same effect. And he said, yeah, but how many spouses do you know of Parkinson's patients that run around their shopping environments, their outside environments with tape in their pocket that they can line down tape? And I said, yeah, so where are you going with this? He said, well, think about it. What if we could train people for 3 months to take larger steps using the visual cues? After that 3 months, could we get them to continue walking well because they've learned how to use that sensory information from their legs? So think about this. When you have lines of tape on the ground, in reality, you have to stare at your feet, check that your heel is actually hitting the ground, and those sensors in the legs that aren't really working all that well, they're getting some confirmation from vision that they're actually hitting the right targets. Every time your heel hits the ground and it hits that line of tape, this is where that proprioception vision connection comes in. Because in reality, you've got the sensors from the legs getting some confirmation that they're actually doing the right thing, and vision helps with that process. So what Hasil did is he took patients, 2 groups of patients. He had one group of patient randomly assigned to walking down these hallways like we've known to do for years. And the other group of patients, he did this sort of thing. To my surprise, in fact, both groups got that same improvement. They were walking faster, step length improved in both of the groups, and it was certainly more than we had a third group of people that weren't doing exercise whatsoever. In addition to that, we do this test at our center called a tug test. It's a timed up and go, which is basically you stand up out of a chair, you walk 3 meters, you turn around, and you come back. Lots of people lose their balance when they're turning. Lots of people have difficulty getting up out of a chair, so it's kind of a more functional test to do that rather than walking a straight line. And the interesting thing is that that tug test, the more functional test, only this group that was walking the lines down the hallway actually got the improvement. And we have to think very carefully about what this means. Why is it that only the lines of tape down the hallway helps us with all of our walking issues, whereas the treadmill doesn't? It's an important question that we're still working on to try and get the answer. One of the things we've come up with, of course, is that when you're on a hallway like this, of course, when you reach the end, you're also practicing the turns to go back in the other direction, right? The hallway's not going to go on forever. So perhaps you get some extra practice on the turns, whereas when you're on a treadmill, you're not really turning at all. And that could be part of the answer, but we're not really sure at this point. And as always, we're always looking to improve the overall symptom severity of our patients. And UPDRS stands for Unified Parkinson's Disease Rating Scale. And in this case, we didn't really find any differences in the symptom severity. So while we did get walking improvements that we know we can get, we didn't really get the symptom severity improvements that we were hoping for. More work to be done, of course. And this is where we're headed. we're working with a company, and we've bought some of these machines right now, where the visual feedback about where your feet are stepping actually shows up on this screen right here. So imagine walking on a treadmill, and rather than having to focus on lines on the ground that are taped to your treadmill, you've got a computer screen here that's showing you your footstep. And you have to try and step within this box, and if you don't step long enough or you don't step in the right spot, you actually get a message or a voice telling you step longer, step wider, step right, step left, so that you're getting constant feedback and constant reminders to see if you can actually improve that function. Now, I'm sure you're wondering how I'm going to get this one passed through ethics, but we do actually have harnesses now. So imagine some of you would have seen when Christopher Reeves was working on some of the spinal cord injury studies, they'd put him in a harness, and in the harness they'd take off some of his weight so that the feet could go. Well, we now have 3 of those devices as well, so that we can literally include, and this has been one of our challenges up to this point. We always end up leaving out the people that are in the wheelchairs and the walkers because it's very dangerous to put them through these studies. In our next set of studies, we will literally be able to include every single Parkinson's patient that wants to be involved. So we're happy to be able to have this equipment to do this sort of work upcoming. Very finally, this is one of my favorite videos to show because I think it demonstrates very clearly how people with very severe movement impairments can bypass the problems by using vision to help them. Let me show you what I mean. So you can see how severe this guy's turning deficit is. He's got a very, very shuffling gait. You can see that typical leaning forward posture. Quite severe freezing, has to be pulled along. Visual cue. All they're telling him to do is kick the ball. So he's going to use his eyes to look where the ball is, and look how much better he can walk. There's no better proof than that. And when you can see somebody's response when they're finally able to walk again, that is what drives us to do our research. So, in summary, vision may contribute to many aspects of movement impairments. There's slow visual processing that we have to think about because it could be delaying our decision-making processes as to how we're going to move. Visual distance estimation may impair movement planning because if you're estimating the wrong distance, then clearly you've got to set a new plan before you can accomplish your goal of getting to the right place. Visual stimuli, in some cases, if there's too many of them, like a cluttered situation, may actually act as a distraction for you. And if you have cognitive deficits, then perhaps distractions are important things to think about because they could be cluttering your environments and making it more difficult for you to move around. So, in conclusion, taking advantage of what we know about vision, and as we try and translate this into strategies that are going to help people, we certainly will have better therapeutic interventions for Parkinson's. I've got a kind of a spin on words here. I heard the song on my drive up. I think it's Nat King Cole that sang the song Straighten Up and Fly Right, which would work really well for a Parkinson's patient, right, to try and straighten up. But I would add to that, take your time and fly right. If you take the time to process the visual information around you, the sensory information around you, I think you'd be surprised what you could accomplish. Thank you very much.
We've actually left lots of time for questions. This is the first, believe it or not, I can't believe I can say this out loud. So I would invite anybody who has questions. I'll bring the microphone over so that everybody can hear. And we've got about 15 minutes, so.
If you just give a wave of your hand, then they'll know to bring you the microphone, okay?
This is a very simple question, but I was wondering, how do you know what is cause and effect? I was thinking of the situation where somebody afterwards, when they've had a difficulty, starts to look in a different way. From personal experience, I know that if I walk down a wooden path or a path in the woods, and there are roots around, if I stumble once, I start looking down. And some of your studies seem to kind of imply that that's the vision that causes that behavior, whereas I would say that sometimes it could be the other way around.
So are you saying, and this is actually helpful for us in terms of how we determine and design our studies. So explain to me the roots, when you see the roots and they become, they trip you up a couple of times, then what happens? You start to focus more on the ground?
I start looking down more and be more careful rather than looking ahead and risking a stumble.
Okay, so actually that's a very good example, because if you think about it, and we have to break these things apart very carefully. So let's start with the issue of first stumbling over the roots. To me, and how it relates to this research, what that would mean to me is that if you're stumbling over roots because you were looking ahead, that means that the sensors in your legs and the cutaneous receptors on the bottom of your feet weren't really telling you about the roots that were approaching, because you should have sensed that with your feet in the first place. So when you initially trip and you start to recognize that there's some issues there, vision says, hey, I better help my legs out, and you start to stare more down at those roots to try and make sense of what your feet are actually processing underneath them. So in that case, vision is probably trying to help sort out the information that's there underneath your feet. You're right that there could be a danger in doing that, though, because if you start to look at a scatter or clutter of roots, let's say it's a very busy forest environment, if it's distracting, you're right that it could actually lead to more impairment. If, though, and this is where we could think about this, if you were a hiker and you wanted to do this every day no matter what, I could potentially say to you, well, let's paint every third root red so that you've got a target to try and step towards. Or you could look for the largest root so that you can sift out that information so that it's not so much clutter, and say, I'm only going to step for the big roots. I'm going to step toward the big ones only, and that would help get rid of the clutter that your brain is processing.
Thank you.
My question has to do with visual impairment of Parkinson's
Yes.
patients. Are you dealing with studies involving Parkinson's patients without visual impairments and those with, as macular degeneration, cataracts, glaucoma, tunnel vision, all those things that tend to come with aging? Because if it is a visual thing and a clutter thing, then the tunnel vision of macular degeneration may be positive.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. An interesting question. In our studies, because we wanted to make sure that it was a Parkinson's impairment and nothing to do with a primary visual impairment, we specifically excluded anyone who had a known problem. So if, other than glasses, of course, if people wear glasses in their everyday walking environments, then we would have allowed them to use their glasses, and that's it. But anyone with glaucoma, cataracts, macular degeneration is a great example. We would have excluded those people to be clear that the findings that we had were Parkinson's specific. It's an interesting question, though, to think about how tunnel vision that might get rid of some of the distractions might actually help someone. And I don't have the answer. We'd have to do the study on those people specifically to...
It also brings up the possibility that these visual disturbances could exacerbate Parkinson's.
Yeah, for certain, for certain. Yeah, if you think about it, if we added on the visual disturbances that are likely to come with age, you would expect most of the effects that I've described here today to be magnified for sure. Absolutely. There's one on that side.
We've ordered a special walker that has a laser beam that shoots on the floor in front. But now I'm wondering, is that a good thing? Because it's not a series
boy.
of steps.
You don't work for their company, do you?
No.
Okay.
I don't.
We have a great collaboration with people from the University of Western Ontario that literally test different assistive devices. And I guess the question would be, how much scientific proof is there behind the device and how much it helps you work? I do have some of our studies where we've tested some of these different types of laser devices. And I'll tell you very honestly that I would love to come up with the best device to be able to help with Parkinson's. So I'll tell you very quickly that we had a group of engineers from the University of Waterloo develop a laser that was on your belt buckle. And it was connected to one of those Kellogg's pedometers so that every time you took a step, it would recognize the speed of your walking and it would project the laser line forward for you so that you could take the next step. And it would be relative to your own speed, which would probably be better than the walker. We tried that and we thought, oh, this is going to be great and everyone will want to use it. And as soon as we did our first study, the problem was, as you walk, you actually do a little bit of a sway. You don't think it's that much until it gets amplified by the fact that the belt sways with you, and then patients are walking all over the place. And then that made us realize that maybe we should look carefully about what other things happen when somebody uses a walker. And what happens in some cases is people start to lean more forward because they're depending on their arms. And remember, the Parkinson's posture is already this. So you're causing your weight shift to be forward. And if you start to lean forward, I think probably Mike may be talking about some of this this afternoon, but if you shift your weight forward, there's a tendency to depend on your arms instead of your legs. If there's a sensory problem with your legs, you may be contributing to the problem by unweighting those legs. In addition to that, if vision is focused on those lines on the ground, you're not really able to pay attention to anything else in your environment. I'm not saying that they're bad in all cases, but it's certainly important to evaluate if it's the right height.
On a trial, so we're not stuck.
Okay, good, good. And I'm glad you don't work for the company.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
I had a question, Dr. Almeida, about self-talk. Do you use self-talk training in your studies to help people to be able to use what they've learned beyond the study itself, so that they can walk better if they, cue themselves with self-talk?
Okay. Could you do me and the rest of the group a favor and explain what you mean by self-talk so that everyone...
Well, it would be a cue. We used to use it with kids with learning disabilities to help them get through a task, because for those kinds of kids, they each new task seems to be like the first time they've ever done it. They don't seem to benefit from repetition like other people do, so we teach them to talk to themselves and cue themselves. So whether like the cueing that would happen if they were on the treadmill and they were hearing a message in their ear.
Okay, so if I'm understanding you correctly, that sounds like basically breaking it down into steps so that they have little pieces that they have to talk through. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. It's a very interesting idea. I can tell you that with a group, and my very first slide was to show you how many people are involved in our research. We have psychologists from York University and Baycrest Geriatric that are working on what they would call, you're calling it self-talk, they call it procedural learning, where, just like learning how to ride a bike, there are steps to the process that you must be able to do, and you have to do them in order, otherwise you won't be able to ride the bike. So we are in the process of doing, we've finished one set of the studies, and I bet some of you remember these studies. We had these toys that they had to build out of different pieces, and you had to operate the toy. And we gave specific instructions as to how you have to build a toy, and we would check if the building was done correctly. We're continuing with that line of research right now to try and figure out if there's a procedural learning deficit in Parkinson's that might address some of these issues. When people tend to get distracted, this may be one of the best answers we could come up with. Thank you. Yeah?
Hi, this is getting off the visual, but I'm wondering if you have any idea about vibration platforms.
Oh, great. This, as I explained about our center, we do a number of different things. So I love when I have a chance to address other things that we're doing. So vibration is a very interesting idea. The question was about vibration, for those of you who didn't hear. There has been some research, and I'll tell you very honestly, as a scientist, I'm supposed to be a skeptic, especially when I'm trying to protect all of you from wasting your money on things that could be a waste. And I was approached by a music therapist at our university who said, oh, I have a treatment for Parkinson's already. It's been approved in Finland for the last 20 years as a treatment for Parkinson's. And I said, oh, what's that? And she said, oh, it's a physioacoustic vibration chair. And I said, yeah, I'll test it just to prove you wrong. It cost $25,000 to buy one of those chairs. But I bought it because I thought, better I buy it than you buy it, and then I can tell everyone in Canada that it doesn't work. Well, I was wrong. What we did is we did a double-blind study just like we would do for a drug trial. What we did is we had one group of patients. There were 50 patients in one group, 50 patients in another group, and they would have come to a room and we would have said, sit in a chair. We didn't tell them which one was the actual vibration chair and which one was the not. And they looked identical, these two chairs. So we double-blinded in the sense that the patients didn't know which chair was supposed to be the beneficial chair. We double-blinded in the sense that when they came out of the room and we assessed them, we didn't know which one received the actual treatment and which one was sitting in the sham chair. And we were very surprised to find out that, in fact, tremor reduced by 20%, rigidity had also decreased, gait, walking speed had actually improved. And they were small improvements, but it certainly leaves room for study. So Laurier and the Sun Life Financial Movement Disorder Center right now is working with what University of Toronto is calling the Music and Health Research Collaboratory. So we're working with a number of hospitals to try and figure out why vibration has these effects. There is one simple answer based on what we've already learned today that makes a lot of sense. If the sensors in the legs that are supposed to send a message up to the brain are supposed to be able to take a signal, and they're not getting that signal very well, or they're not shooting it up to the brain very well anymore, if we stimulated those sensors, either we're going to be helping the sensors themselves, or we're helping the part of the brain that does that processing by giving the vibration. It's not proven beyond the shadow of a doubt, but it's certainly important to make sure that we can prove this, and that's why we're doing those studies right now.
So how often would you say, if you have one, should you use it for a Parkinson's patient?
And in our study, and this is why I sort of set it up to fail when we had done our study, I literally gave only 5 minutes worth of treatment, and there was an immediate effect, which was astonishing to me. Right now, we're in the process, based on our exercise model, we are in the process of evaluating what happens when you get it 3 times a week for a period of 3 months. So that would be a total of 36 sessions. And I don't have the answer yet, but I will have the answer soon as to whether or not that actually helps.
So are you using the chair or are you using platform?
Yeah, we're using the chair, and I should explain that the reason that the chair might be more beneficial is that a platform only stimulates the bottom of the foot. So if you're standing on a platform, the only sensors that are getting it are the feet. If you do it in a chair where the vibration is in the head, the shoulders, the back, the butt, all the way down, you're literally getting every part of the muscular system that has proprioceptors in it.
But they say if you stand on it, it sends.
Yeah.
It does go out.
Yeah, no, I would agree that it's basically like standing in a frying pan. If you shake the frying pan, your entire body is going to shake. I guess my feeling is that the more direct the stimulation could be, likely the better. I can't say for sure because I haven't done the study. It would make sense to compare the two together to be able to answer that question.
That's absolutely fascinating. I do have a question for you over here. Hi.
Yeah.
First of all, I'm a little annoyed the fact that you said that clutter in the home is a bad thing. Let me just tell you, I got some work to do. My best friend here is going to actually help me.
We could start training everybody by just walking through these tables.
I tell you, it's pretty bad. My husband has Parkinson's. He's had Parkinson's probably since about his mid-40s, and he actually says probably in his 30s. We're struggling with it now. What I'm fascinated by, though, is when you're talking about the visual disturbances and the walking. When my son was younger, he had a bit of a lazy eye. I put tape on his glasses to prevent the eye from going that way because he could visually see it was blurry. Would you be able to train Parkinson's patients' eyes to remain straight ahead or to look where it's supposed to look when you're walking?
You know, it's a very, very good question where, you know, I think that was the idea behind some of our studies where we trained people for 3 months with the lines of tape. We were trying to train people to see if they would stick to keeping their feet out to where they're supposed to, the nice, large, well-balanced step lengths. And in those studies, yes, it's very clear that does help. Some of you already know in this room that we're part of an international committee that evaluates exercises and prescription of exercise for Parkinson's as well as other disorders. Our research has shown that strategies that we've developed, not just us, but other people have also developed, that are focused on sensory function, attentional function. We have a program that's, I'm happy to say, very soon to be released to the public of Canada now, called PD SafeX, Sensory Attention Focused Exercise. That program, which is a 36-class program, which I know a number of people here have already been involved in, is based on that very premise. And we do see an actual decrease in symptom severity when people are performing those exercises.
I think we have time for about 2 more questions that I know this gentleman had. So,
Actually, I have an answer.
Great, I like answers.
I was going to ask you whether people with AMD should be participating in your research, and you said no. So you actually saved my wife a lot of driving time from Lions Head to Wilfrid Laurier. I was a graduate there from when it was called Waterloo Lutheran, so you know how old I am.
Wow.
Well,
Very good.
and I would say I have a couple of other problems. I have edema and I have peripheral neuropathy. That
Yes.
all complicates my walking, especially at night when I'm off the pills. I bounce off the walls a little. I take care of some of that problem by having night lights all over the place.
Okay, and I thank you for bringing up that point because, in fact, in some of our research, peripheral neuropathy, I'll just explain very briefly, is when you lose for the reason that your peripheral nerves are no longer processing the information. So in diabetics, for example, this is quite common, that in your toes you'll lose sensation over time. So in those cases, if you compare peripheral neuropathy diabetics to Parkinson's patients, in fact, their walking is very similar. And probably one of the reasons is that there's some sensory mechanism that drives both of the issues. And in fact, edema also dampens sensory information from coming up the legs into the spinal cord as well. So thank you for bringing that up because it actually helps support our arguments.
we have time for one last question. Is there one last question out there? Oh, Hannah. Sorry.
I knew somebody worked in one of the companies that I was dealing with. Yeah. Oh. Yeah, no, so I'm not sure everybody can hear the question. I'm not sure the microphone is on, but it was about, first she said she was from Finland. So she was offended that I was trying to disprove the equipment. But To answer your question, the question was there already a starting point, or did we just randomly decide what setting we were going to be basing it on? And in fact, we are just scratching the surface of the potential of the vibration equipment. The music therapy people have believed for a long time that the frequency of 40 hertz is a specific frequency that causes the thalamus, that's the part of the brain that processes sensory information, to reorganize its ability to process sensory information. So there was a starting point of saying 40 hertz. What's interesting is now that we're working with the group at University of Toronto and our own Center for Music Therapy at Laurier, we're discovering that there are bandwidths above and below that also have some effects. And we're not sure if those effects are better or just equal to 40 hertz, but it's important to sort of try and figure out those questions and see why they would actually work. But for some reason, 40 hertz seems to be the same rhythm that a healthy person would receive firing through the thalamus system itself.
Could you briefly describe one of these chairs? Because I think a lot of people have never heard of it and would be interested
Yeah,
in
so
a description.
the chairs are basically, it looks like a lazy boy, so it's almost looks like a great thing that you'd want to have in your house, except for the cost. Since I bought the chair, I also took it apart so that I could see what was inside it. And in reality, what was there, when I was saying that it's at the head and the shoulders, they were speakers. So underneath the cushions, they were speakers, because the speakers deliver sound waves, and you can control the frequency of the vibration of the speaker so that you can get it to the 40 hertz that we were going at. And in fact, the way that these chairs are designed in Finland, and this is beyond my expertise for sure, this is more the field of music therapy, you can alternate the rhythms between the head and the body and the feet, or you can pulse them all at the same time. So the music therapists kind of designed that part for me, because I wouldn't have a background in knowing why they're choosing the strategies that they choose. But it's certainly a growing field in Canada to start to understand why music therapies are helping and vibration therapies are helping.
So the music therapy is not listening to a Mozart
not
concerto,
specifically in
it's-
Parkinson's.
yeah.
We have been, I can speak for the Center for Music Therapy at our institution and say that they have been doing that for things like depression and Alzheimer's, not specifically Parkinson's, no.
Thank you.
I think that's the end of our questions this morning, and I just wanted to take the time to thank Dr. Almeida for an excellent and enlightening presentation.